Okay. Okay, everyone, so welcome back again. And now we're going to start looking at the suttas for this retreat. And as I mentioned yesterday, we're going to kind of use the Potthapada Sutta as the framework for this retreat. And this particular sutta is found in the Digha Nikaya. These are the long discourses of the Buddha. And it is a very nice sutta, and I was very pleased that was actually recommended to me or suggested to me that we use this sutta. It's a very nice one. It's a bit different entryway to looking at some of the core teachings of the Buddha than we normally use. And as I said yesterday, the core part of the sutta is the gradual training. It's often called the gradual training, and it basically consists of the whole path of Buddhism, starting from the very beginning until you come all the way to the very end. So it's a very useful framework for understanding what it is that we have to do. And you will recognize probably that you are, somewhere on this training you will find yourself. It's not a precise spot, of course, that we kind of are at, because the mind is kind of always shifting a little bit and changing a little bit. But it gives an idea of where you have to focus your efforts, what actually really is important. And one of the things I always like to point out on these kind of retreats is how do we decide which suttas are really important on the Buddhist path? There are so many suttas, yeah? I don't know if you noticed, but there's lots of suttas. And there are literally thousands of suttas. And some of them are very minor, but lots of even large, long suttas that are very interesting here. So how do we decide what is the critical or core part of the Buddhist teachings? And this is a very interesting thing to discuss, at least very briefly, because very often you will be told, this sutta is what Buddhism is all about, and the kind of the typical sutta that everyone says is the core of Buddhism is the Satipatthana Sutta, And of course, it is an important sutta. No one doubts that. Every sutta is important, so you can't say it's not important. But is there really any grounds for, taking one sutta out of all of them and saying this is the most important one? And if there is a ground, what is that ground? And the basic idea is that if you want to find out what is important, what you have to do is you have to ask, what did the Buddha say is important, right? That's kind of the obvious solution. And if you ask that question, what did the Buddha say is important? How does he summarize his own teachings? You find that he said, one of the things that he said is that the core, or the thing that summarizes all his teachings, are what is called the 37 aids to awakening, the 37 bodhipakkhya dhammas in the Pali language. He says that in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the great sutta on the Buddha's passing away. So if something falls within that context, then we know it is a core part of Buddhism. And of course, one of the things that he says in there that is core to the suttas is Satipatthana practice. Satipatthana practice basically just means meditation practice. And so Satipatthana as a group is critical. And then within Satipatthana as the group, there is a large number of suttas, large number of discourses that actually concern Satipatthana practice. You find those in what is called the Satipatthana Samyutta, the connected discourses on Satipatthana practice. There's about 50 suttas there, and there are scattered suttas throughout the Pali scriptures. And one of these suttas, among all of the other ones, is the Satipatthana Sutta. There's only one among all of these suttas. So it is important in the sense that it fits into the overall framework of what is important in Buddhism. Nevertheless, it is only one sutta among many. And if you want to understand, even if you want to understand just Satipatthana, you have to take into account all of those suttas. Only then can you really fully understand it. So it is those teachings that fit into this framework of the Buddha, the 37 aids to awakening is one way of thinking about what is important. Yeah. So what about this gradual training? Does it fit into that? Well, the gradual training is really just an expansion of the Noble Eightfold Path. Yeah, it is a Noble Eightfold Path, or perhaps tenfold path, depending on how you look at it, put in, kind of expanded out. I will show you later on exactly how that works. It is an expansion of the Noble Eightfold Path. So from that point of view, it is core Buddhist teaching here. Another way to think about it is that those suttas, those discourses that the Buddha taught in many different places to many different people with slight variations on a theme. One of the wonderful things about the teachings of the Buddha is that they're not always exactly the same. There's slight variations on the theme. So he shows things maybe a slightly different sequence. He expresses things in a slightly different way, in one sutta compared to another one. And these are the things that makes you really excited as a monk, when you see that. Slight variation, because that slight variation says something important about what is going on at that point. This is because the Buddha shows you a different angle. And when you hear things from different angles, you build up this view, this idea of what is going on. If you always hear the same thing from the same angle, actually it can be hard to really understand it from, in a rounded way, if you like. It becomes very specific. So this is kind of one of the wonderful things about the suttas. It may seem very repetitive, but when you go into the details, actually it is less repetitive than what you might think. There's more interesting things going on than what you think there. So this is one of the reasons why this teaching is so important, because it occurs in many, many, many places in the suttas. Maybe there's 30 different occurrences of this particular framework of the gradual training. 30, that's a lot, because it's a long, long sutta. And here we are talking about the Digha Nikaya, the long discourses of the Buddha. And in the Digha Nikaya is divided into 3 chapters. The first chapter is called the chapter on sila, on virtue. And this chapter, every sutta except for one sutta in that chapter has the gradual training in it. One sutta after the other, just packed into one chapter. And so again, this shows you kind of how fundamental it is to this entire path of practice. So I'm just making the case for why I think it is appropriate to use this particular framework as a way of understanding the Dhamma overall, getting a feeling for what is going on. So I hope you agree with me. If you don't agree, that's okay. You're certainly allowed not to agree. I'm not going to tell you what to believe, but it's. I'm just making a case because I think it is an important case to be made. But these are the long suttas. There's actually quite a bit more to this sutta than the gradual training. There's also this discussion between the Buddha and this wanderer, Potthapada. And further down in the sutta, there's also another fellow who comes in. There's a fellow called Chitta Hatti Sariputta. Chitta, elephant Sariputta. Hatti is elephant. Hatti Sariputta. Sariputta means like the son of Sari. It's a bit strange name, but anyway, I'm not sure exactly how it works. So this Chitta fellow also comes in further down, and then they have this discussion about the Dhamma, and it ends in the whole sutta ends in a very nice way. So this is what we are going to look at. Usually I also say a little bit about the idea of using the word of the Buddha to understand the Dhamma. And it's very common. It has been very common in the Buddhist world. It's getting maybe a little bit less common now, but it's been very, very common in the Buddhist world to teach the Dhamma based on what your teacher teaches. It's called known as the Acharya Vada. Acharya means teacher. Ajahn is just a Thai way of saying Acharya, so it means teacher. And Vada means like teaching or doctrine. So it's like the doctrine of the teacher. And very standard in Buddhism that the way that it works is that, okay, you listen to your teacher, and that is your dhamma. That is how you understand Buddhism. And that's all very well if your teacher knows what they're talking about. Yeah? If your teacher has got the right view and they understand what is going on, it's wonderful, because then you're very likely to get very good teachings. But actually, even if your teacher is fully enlightened, even if they're an arahant, the reality is that their way of presenting the Dhamma is very often going to be idiosyncratic. It's going to be according to how they practice their path. Yeah? It's going to be according to what they did. And there's many teachers who I think are, have a very good understanding of the Dhamma from a personal perspective. And yet, when you go to the suttas, you find a breadth of scope, a kind of complete idea of what the Dhamma is about that is far broader than any individual teacher will ever teach you, even if they're an arahant, even if they are, whatever, an arya or whatever. So there's two shortcomings with just following your teacher. First of all, you don't really know if they know what they're talking about. And secondly, even if they do know what they're talking about, the idea of the Dhamma is usually going to be more narrow than what you find in the suttas. So for this reason, it's very, very powerful to come back to the suttas. And these suttas, these discourses of the Buddha, often people say, yeah, but we don't really know, did they come from the Buddha, or were they kind of some dodgy monks who who taught these suttas, who edited these things, who kind of put them together. Can we really trust that this is the word of the Buddha? And I think the answer is yes, we can trust that this is the word of the Buddha. And the reason we can trust that is because today we have a lot of tools available to us. We do comparative studies of the suttas across various traditions. You can do textual analysis, compare the suttas with later Buddhist texts. And after a while, the evidence is quite strong that this is a coherent group of teachings that belong together, that came from a particular place, from a particular person. And that person we call the Buddha. He is the one who gave us these teachings. And if you're interested in looking at this a bit more deeply, there is a very nice book called The Authenticity of the Early Buddhist Texts. The author shall remain anonymous for now. But it gives a nice summary for why it is that we have good reasons for believing that these are the teachings of the Buddha. So please have a look at that if you're interested. I'm not going to talk more about that for now, because it kind of gets us a little bit kind of off the topic. But please feel free to ask questions about this, and we can answer these things during the Q&A session in the evening here. Gee, this is really nice, isn't it? I've got a... People are so nice. And this table, by the way, is a very nice idea. So thank you for the organizers of this, these wonderful organizers of ours. Is it okay to drink from the... I can use your cup. Okay, sadhu, sadhu. That's very kind of you. Yeah. Aha, I see. Okay, okay. I'm low-tech monk. Okay. Press the button. Okay. Aha, and I can drink straight from that one. Is that right? Okay. Gee. Okay. Sadhu, sadhu. Thank you. It works, that's good. Okay. Excellent. Okay, so let's get into this sutta and see what it has to say here. And the translation that I'm using is the translation by Bhante Sujato, because he's my friend, so I always kind of, my friends, they sort of take priority in these things. It's also because his translation is very nice. It is usually quite easy to read. It doesn't use words that are too technical or too difficult. And it was one of the things that he set out to do when he did these translations, to do them in a way that it is relatively easy to comprehend. Yeah, that's kind of was one of the whole ideas behind his translation work. Yeah. So let's see what this sutta has to say. So we're now starting at the very beginning. So this Sutta Digha Nikaya 9 with Potthapada. And the first section of this sutta is called On the Wanderer Potthapada. And this is how it goes. So I have heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's grove, Anathapindika's monastery here. Yeah, so this is how almost most suttas start out in this way. So I have heard. This means that we are dealing with an oral tradition. Yeah, it's being passed down orally. That's why it is so I have heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying at Savatthi. It always starts off giving us some information about where the Buddha was staying or someone else was staying. And here, Savatthi, of course, very famous capital of the Kosalan kingdom at that time. And this is where the Buddha's main monastery was. And the reason it's called Jeta's Grove is because this place was originally owned by a person called Prince Jeta, and then it was bought by Anathapindika, who was one of the Buddha's main disciples. And there's a famous story found in the Vinaya Pitaka about how that purchase happened. And it's quite an extraordinary event, but I won't go into that now. So, let's just go on here. Now, at that time, the wanderer Potthapada was residing together with 300 wanderers in Mallika's single-halled monastery for group debates, set among the flaking pale moon ebony trees. Okay. So these are. So here we are dealing with a group of wanderers, yeah? So the wanderers of ancient India, these were like the religious people at that time. They are also known as samanas. Samanas are like people who have a certain ascetic practice or a certain religious practice. And the wanderers are one group of samanas. Paribhajaka is the Pali word for this. And so they are often would go to debating halls. Yeah, but very common in ancient India, as apparently it is even in the present day, that the religious people would debate with each other. And then people would come and they would listen to the debates, and they will decide who is right and who is wrong, and hopefully they would find something useful. Very often they would not. And the reason why they would not is because the majority, once you get into a debate with someone, the ego tends to get inserted into the debate, yeah? I want to win. And at the moment you want to win the debate, it is no longer going to be all that useful. Because the moment the ego gets in there, the truth gets distorted. And it has more to do with how you feel about yourself and about your followers than it has to do with searching for truth. Of course, there are exceptions to that. And what we shall see in a second is that the Buddha, of course, is an exception to that. That's one of the reasons you have faith in the Buddha, because it's not coming from this ego consciousness, if you like. So this was one of the very common things in ancient India, and they would build halls specifically for these kind of debates. Yeah, this is kind of the single-halled monastery. That's what this is about. And this is Mallika's single-halled monastery. It has her name. Mallika was one of the queens of King Pasenadi. King Pasenadi was the king of the Kosalan Empire at that time, and she was his favorite queen, or number one queen. And so she built a monastery for these group debates. Yeah, it's a bit like Emirates Stadium, yeah, Mallika's monastery. It's kind of same kind of idea. I don't know if it had a logo on it, but anyway, it's a kind of similar sort of thing here. And she was a Buddhist, of course, Mallika, and still she obviously built, maybe this was before she became a Buddhist, and she built this hall for debates. That's how important this was at that time. So obviously considered very significant. Not sure about this flaking pale moon ebony trees, but anyway, that's what that is all about. But anyway, it's there. So that is kind of the background for this, yeah? And of course, now what we're going to see, of course, is kind of obvious. We're going to see a meeting of the Buddha with these wanderers. So it's going to be exciting. Is there going to be some fireworks, or what's going to happen when this occurs? And then the Buddha robed up in the morning, and taking his bowl and robe, he entered Savatthi for alms. Yeah, you go for alms round to collect your food. Yeah, it's this is how things were done in ancient India. This is how it is still done in many Buddhist countries to the present day. in Bodhinyana Monastery, we have a Mickey Mouse arms around her, yeah? If you know what I mean, we kind of go downstairs and we go back in again. It's not really convenient to walk into the city, but I know that people like Venerable Akaliko sitting next to me here, he goes for they go for arms around every day here. Yeah, they live in Sydney, in one of the very beautiful suburbs over there, and every day they go for arms around. And I have been over there myself with them, and it's actually a very beautiful thing to do. And very often, what is so beautiful about it is that people recognize you as a kind of spiritual person or a religious person, if you like. And when they see you, they get really inspired. Yeah, it's actually beautiful. And people who are not Buddhists, they are all walks of life. Maybe Venerable Kalika can talk about this later on, but he just mentioned this the other day. And they come out and they want to support you. Yeah, people, this is like called Little India in Sydney, because there's kind of so many Indian restaurants and Indian people of Indian extraction or Indian background who live in this area. And so you walk around, and of course Indian people have a very strong consciousness of spiritual people, yeah, even though you may not be their kind of person. So this is exactly the way it was in ancient India. I remember one of the monks in our monastery, he is not staying with us anymore. He left the monastery a long time ago. He's still a monk, but not here. And when he went to India on pilgrimage, which is a very common thing that we do as Buddhists, he just decided to go arms around for him by himself into this random village. Very dangerous thing to do, because the bacterial flora in India is quite different from Australia. Yeah. So when you go there, chances of getting an upset stomach is very high, unless you're very, very careful what you do, especially if you just go to a random village somewhere. So he just walked into this random village. This ordinary Indians, they are very poor, most of them. And he walks with, and straight away when they see him, everyone wants to give him food. Yeah. So before he knows it, he has a full alms bowl. It's so touching. Yeah. It's so beautiful when that happens. There's a connection there straight away between someone who is seen as a religious seeker and then the people around. And of course, he ate that alms food. I'm not sure what happens to his tummy, but he's still around. He survived anyway. So. But he was one of these kind of slightly, he liked to live a bit on the edge. So he did all kind. I'm not going to tell too many stories about him, because he did things that I would not recommend anyone else to do. So it's a wonderful thing. And sometimes taking a little bit of risk like that, yeah. Sometimes we live in a society that is so risk averse. We're afraid of everything. And when you're afraid of everything, you don't really get a chance to sometimes see these things that actually are really inspiring and interesting. Sometimes a little bit of risk is necessary to be able to see things that are exceptional and interesting and extraordinary. So please don't be too risk averse. Sometimes take a bit of risk, at least within reason, of course. So this is India for you. So the Buddha goes out for alms, just like anyone else. He was one of the monks, and then. He robes up in the morning. That means you put your robe over two shoulders, and you enter the city. If you have been in India, if you have been to Savatthi, you know that the monastery was about maybe a kilometer or so outside of the city, maybe not even a kilometer, fairly close to the city. So it's all quite close together. And then he says, it occurred to him, it is too early to wander for alms in Savatthi. Why don't I go to Mallika's monastery to visit the wanderer Potthapada? And that's what he did. So you see the Buddha actually taking up the challenge almost, of going to these wanderers and having a conversation with them. And this is also interesting. One of the things that the Buddha says in the suttas is that, where are you most likely to find people who are open to the dhamma? Where is that most likely? And of course, if you have disciples already who are practicing in the right way, especially maybe the monastic disciples, usually the Buddha puts on the very top. Yes, the monastic disciples, obviously, because they're already Buddhists. And then, of course, the lay people, the upasakas and upasikas. But outside of the obvious people, who are the most likely to find people who are interested? And of course, one of the places are these wanderers, these samanas that existed in Indian societies who were actually religious seekers. And one of the things that we will see in a second is that these wanderers or these samurais in ancient India, very often they were not very dogmatic. Sometimes they were very dogmatic, but not always. Sometimes they were genuine spiritual seekers. They actually wanted to discover truth. They were interested in finding out how do we live well? How do we know what is right and what is wrong? Is there such a thing as spiritual enlightenment? If there is, what is it? How do you get there? They were interested in all these kind of spiritual questions. And so this is what which is so beautiful in a sense about this kind of society. And it says something about how we too, what our attitude should be towards the Dhamma and towards spiritual search. It should be similar. It should be open-minded. It shouldn't be too kind of dogmatic. Yeah, I'm a Buddhist. Yeah, believe or rebirth or get lost, that kind of thing. If we have that kind of attitude, then it's problematic. So, and of course, this is what our society is about. Yeah, the modern society is a society where we are using science to find truth. We are using whatever means we have to kind of search for what actually is right in this world and what is wrong. This is already an attitude that we have, and we should bring that attitude also to the spiritual path. It should not be something dogmatic that we hold on to, because dogmatism usually just leads to arguments. Yeah, I'm right, you're wrong, and then we're going to fight a war over it. Whoever wins the war is right. It doesn't make any sense, right? But that's kind of usually how it has been in history when dogmatic religions kind of meet. And it's kind of has very, very bad consequences. So we don't really want to have those consequences. So the idea to have an open mind, to be able to listen, to be able to kind of develop yourself in a certain way is actually a very beautiful thing. And this is what we can learn from some of these things in the suttas. It doesn't mean that we should have an, open mind that is too open. Of course, we have to have some ideas, you have to have confidence in and these kind of things. It doesn't mean that you listen to other people and take on their views just like that, but it just means that we are not too holding on too strongly to things. And we have an idea of changing our views and moving in the right direction. So anyway, the Buddha decides to go to this wanderer. So, but of course, what happens now at that time? Potthapada was sitting together with that large assembly of wanderers, making an uproar, a dreadful racket. You can imagine if it's a debating hall, it can very easily descend into a dreadful racket, right? And they engage in all kinds of unworthy talk, such as talk about kings, bandits, and ministers, talks about armies, threats, and wars, talks about food, drink, clothes, and beds, talk about garlands and fragrances, talks about family, vehicles, villages, towns, cities, and countries, talks about women and heroes, street talk or street gossip and well gossip, talk about the departed, motley talk. Okay, motley talk, right? Tales of the land and the sea, and talk about being reborn in this or that state of existence. So many of these things, you wonder whether that was really the right kind of talk for wanderers, right? I'm not sure what kind of religion this is, if this is what they're talking about. But anyway, this is common. And this expression that you see here is a common expression that you find in many places in the suttas. And if the monks or the nuns talk about these sort of things, they usually get a gentle telling off by the Buddha. Yeah, you are monks, you're talking about these things. You shouldn't be talking about these things. That's basically what the Buddha says. Yeah, and sometimes it's good to be reminded of these things. Yeah, because sometimes monks do get a bit engaged in kind of talk that looks a bit like this. And I'm probably, to be honest, sometimes everyone gets engaged. Sometimes gets caught up a little bit in these kind of things. So it's a good reminder. So what is the issue with all this stuff? Well, the Buddha, or not the Buddha, but actually elsewhere, it is called unworthy talk. Unworthy, what's the Pali word for unworthy? And the Pali word is tirachana. And tirachana has kind of, the basic meaning of tirachana is animal. Yeah, so it means something like animal talk. I'm not sure animals talk very much, but anyway, it's called it's called animal talk. And the idea here is not to kind of put people down, to say you are talking like animal talk. I think the idea, there's many ways of understanding this particular expression, but one way is to simply consider it like inferior talk. Yeah, it is not the superior talk, but it's inferior talk. It doesn't lead you anywhere. It stops you from going forward on the path. Yeah, it doesn't have any kind of purpose to it. It's just something we do to pass the time, or you do it because you are suffering. Yeah, suffering makes us do all kinds of things in life. Escapes from suffering is one of the main problems. You want to escape from suffering, you will do all kinds of things, including talking about things that are nonsensical. So it is a lower kind of talk. Yeah, it is a talk that is associated with people or with anyone who is kind of stuck in a lower mental state, a mental state that doesn't really bring you anywhere spiritually. And higher talk is talk that is associated with a higher kind of mental state, a more happy mental state, a more peaceful mental state. So ultimately, this is what it means when we talk about things being like animal. Yeah, it must mean it's a lower state in terms there's less happiness there, there's less peace there, there's more suffering there. Whereas a higher talk is it's talk that actually has more of these positive qualities. Yeah, so this is how we define in Buddhism what is inferior and what is superior. It is all defined by whether it really makes you more content, happy, satisfied as a person. Yeah? And those things that lead to those things, they are superior things, whereas those things that lead away from that, they are inferior. And it's a very good way of classifying things. It is very good because this is what everyone wants. Yeah? We really, ultimately, we want happiness. But because we don't understand how to find that happiness and to go away from suffering, we pursue it in the wrong way. We pursue it by low means, tirachana kata, animal talk. And that's why we don't succeed. So it's actually useful. This is not a value statement. It's not to say that you are bad because you talk about these things. It is merely a statement based on what actually leads you somewhere and what does not. And when you think about it in this way, then it becomes a very useful thing. Yeah? Tirachana kata. Tirachana also means something which is horizontal. Yeah, we are trying to go a spiritual path can be considered something that goes, we're trying to go vertically, we're trying to kind of move up in the world, yeah, spiritually. But this is like a horizontal thing. It kind of makes you stuck on a kind of horizontal level. You don't go anywhere else. You don't go anywhere on the spiritual path, I should say. And that's another way of thinking about this. This is why it has this kind of that's why it is expressed in this way. Another translator, he called it bestial talk. I thought that was a little bit too strong. I think unworthy talk by Bhante Sujato is a nice way of talking about, of translating this. So what exactly is this unworthy talk? Yeah, and if you look at that list, yeah, food, drink, clothes, fragrance, families, vehicles, street gossip. I like the idea of street gossip rather than street talk. Well gossip, you can imagine well gossip, yeah, coming around the well, holding water together, and of course you're going to gossip about things, talking about the departed. So, why is this stuff so low? What is the problem with this? And what is really the issue here? And what you will notice is that a lot of this talk that is mentioned here is things that have to do with just ordinary worldly things. Yeah, it is about how to enjoy the sensory world. What is your favorite food? Yeah, oh yeah, I like this kind of food. I like that kind of food. Or it's all about this world around us. It is about, or maybe just empty talk, like tales, yeah, stories and things about heroes or whatever. And so it is all related to the world around us. Yeah, this sensory world around us. And of course, this sensory world around us, this is exactly where we are stuck. This is the problem. Yeah, we are stuck in the sensory world from the moment you wake up in the morning to the moment you go to bed at night, except for maybe when you do a bit of meditation. This is the world we are in. This is where we're stuck. And a very important part of the Buddhist practice is to elevate ourselves out of the sensory world, at least mentally, So if we reinforce that sensory world by always talking about it, we're going to be more stuck in that sensory world. We're not allowing ourselves the possibility of escape, of going beyond that, of experiencing something more profound, something more meaningful, something more real. Yeah, that path we are blocking in part by this kind of talk. And that is why it is problematic. It keeps us trapped in the ordinary world. It doesn't allow us that kind of escape. So, again, don't be hard on yourself if occasionally you talk about these things. Yeah, that's kind of not the point here. The point is just to remember, that actually, what is the path all about? How do we get out of this? And this is an aspect of that. So, So talk, so all kinds of unworthy talk, kings, bandits, and ministers. I like that kind of I always find that quite interesting. Kings, bandits, and ministers. Yeah, the kings and ministers go together with bandits, right? It's kind of fascinating. Yeah. And I think that's often how it has been in history of the world. Yeah, if you have dodgy kings, etc., they will kind of take all your money without any reason. And if you have dodgy ministers, they will do the same thing, corruption, all this kind of thing. So there's, in ancient India, there wasn't the distinguishing line between the two wasn't always all that great. If you had a good king, of course, wonderful. If you have a dodgy one, then you were in serious trouble. And women and heroes, I think maybe talking about this is kind of male-oriented. Maybe you can say that for women, but maybe they might talk about men and heroes, perhaps. And then you have the idea of gossip, talk about the departed. You may think, well, what's wrong with talking about the departed? Isn't that good? You believe in rebirth. Well, it really depends how you talk about the departed. Whether you just make it into stories. Departed here also means peta, it also means ghost. So maybe this means ghost stories, I'm not sure. So it depends how we use it. If we use it skillfully, it is good. If you use it unskillfully, then it is kind of useless. Tales of the land and sea, there's various kind of things. Being reborn in this or that state. Again, this really depends how you use it, because rebirth in this or that state can be very interesting if you talk about it in a spiritual context. But here, presumably, the context is one that is kind of more gossipy and more kind of silly without really real kind of purpose. Okay, so this is what they're talking about. And then what happens? Potthapada saw the Buddha coming in the distance, and he hushed his own assembly. Be quiet, good sirs, don't make a sound. Here comes the ascetic Gautama. The Venerable likes quiet and praises quiet. Hopefully, if he sees that our assembly is quiet, he'll see fit to approach. Then those wanderers fell silent. This is quite nice, isn't it? They realize that actually maybe we're not really doing what is appropriate. And the Buddha is around the corner. Oh, look, the Buddha is coming. Yeah, they don't call him the Buddha, they call him the ascetic Gautama, because they are not disciples or anything like that. And then they become quiet. They want to invite a good person into their midst. So they want to be quiet. They're interested in hearing what the Buddha has to say, because the Buddha, already a famous person in India, presumably at that time, and they're interested in hearing what he has to say. Because this openness again, These are wanderers of a different religion, different views, different ideas. Still, they want to have a conversation with somebody to the point that they're willing to kind of sacrifice their own conversation, and be quiet so as he may approach. And this gives a good idea for how you invite somebody, how we should be inviting towards others. We should ask ourselves, how can we make them feel at ease? How can we make them feel welcome? How can we do things in such a way that they, will come more often? So we can get those people who maybe have some real insight into the Buddhist teachings to come around to be with us, because that is going to be very beneficial for us if that happens. That's kind of the right kind of attitude here. And so it's, again, I don't know, I find this it's actually quite nice, because they obviously have a very good attitude about what is going on now. Then the Buddha approached Potthapada, who said to him, "Come, Blessed One, welcome, Blessed One. It's been a long time since you took the opportunity to come here. Please, sir, sit down. This seat is ready." So very kind of gentleman-actly way of acting, which is very nice. The Buddha sat down on the prepared seat, while Potthapada took a low seat and sat down to one side. Yeah, again, this idea of taking a low seat, the height of the seat is classically a way of making a distinction in status in ancient India. Yeah, so if you had a high seat, then you considered to have a higher status. If you had a low seat, then you had a lower status. One of the interesting rules for monastics is that you're not allowed to teach Dhamma to someone sitting on a higher seat than you. Yeah, or if you are sitting on the ground, you can't teach Dhamma to someone who is sitting on a chair or whatever. Yeah, that kind of even though Western culture is a bit different from Asian culture, even in Western culture that kind of makes sense. Yeah, if you're sitting on the ground and someone else is sitting on like a throne or something, obviously this doesn't feel quite right. There's a kind of and it has to do with elevating the Dhamma, the teachings. If you are humble about the teachings, you're more likely to be receptive to the message. But if you're full of yourself, of course, you're already full. There's no room for the Dhamma if you're full of yourself. Yeah, it's already coming out of your ears, so you're kind of you're going to be stuck. So it's actually a nice symbolic thing, and he is doing everything in the right way. Yeah, and of course that is one of the reasons why the Buddha goes to see him, precisely because he knows this wanderer is ready to listen. Yeah, he's not someone who has the wrong attitude. Potthapada, what were you sitting talking about just now? What conversation was unfinished? And when he said this, the wonder Potthapada said to the Buddha, "Sir, leave aside what we were sitting talking about just now. Yeah, women, villages, towns, wars. Yeah. It won't be hard for you to hear about that later." Yeah, that's the Buddha's way of being polite, getting started. Yeah, it's kind of this nice way of starting a conversation. Yeah, what are you talking about? Yeah, and then kind of you get going. And then Potthapada says further, "Sir, a few days ago, several ascetics and Brahmins who follow various other paths were sitting together at the debating hall, and this discussion came up among them. How does the cessation of perception happen?" So this is kind of fascinating, yeah, and we are really diving in on the deep end of the Dhamma here, because the idea of the cessation of perception, I mean, this here are the various wanderers discussing it, but from a Buddhist point of view, the idea of cessation of perception is something extremely profound, yeah, really, really super duper profound. In fact, it is so profound that it's almost at the very end of the Buddhist path. So we're really diving in here at the very deep end of things. Of course, what these wanderers meant by this may be quite a different matter. Yeah, it really depends on their philosophical outlook and all of these kind of things. But of course, for the Buddha to answer this in a proper way, he will have to add the Buddhist approach to what this means. So how does the cessation of perception happen? Well, what does this even mean, the cessation of perception? What is this all about? What is perception anyway? And so to understand what is going on here, I'm going to have to talk a little bit about perception and what this actually refers to. And I did mention yesterday very briefly that in Buddhism we talk about 5 khandhas. Yeah? And 5 khandhas are, if you like, 5 aspects of the personality. That's one way of thinking about it. 5 groupings, 5 kinds of phenomena that we find within ourselves. Yeah? And the reason why the Buddha divides the world up into these 5 khandhas is because these are the areas where we want to have insight. We want to understand these 5 khandhas, these 5 aspects of personality according to what they actually are, according to reality, as it says in the sutras. Because if we understand ourselves according to reality, if we see things in the right way, then of course we can make good decisions. Understanding things in the right way is always going to be beneficial, because then we can make good decisions about things. We know what is right, we know what is wrong, we know how the world works. If you don't know how the world works, how can you make good decisions about things? It's impossible. So these are the areas of insight, of understanding, and that is why they are so important. So what are these 5 khandhas? Well, the first one, we're going to talk about this much more depth later on, but the first one is rupa. Rupa means like form or material things, yeah? Like the body, for example, is rupa. Yeah? Rupa is more than that, but it is certainly the body is one aspect. The second one is Vedana, and Vedana is roughly the fact that we feel the world, and feelings can roughly be divided into positive, negative, and neutral. Yeah, very important part of the 5 khandhas, the idea of feeling. This is what gives meaning to life, meaning to anything. The third one, and this is the one we're dealing with now, is sanya. This is usually translated as perception into English. Yeah, so let me just pass that one by very briefly. You have some idea, the word perception already probably means something to you. The fourth one is sankhara, and sankhara is the will. Yeah. You know what the will is? The will is what makes you do anything, yeah? The will makes me grab. I haven't forgotten to drink this. As soon as I see it, desire arises, and when desire arises, it's very nice, and I have a good excuse because my throat is a little bit sore, so I have, That's much better, just so I can able to speak, right? So the will is just what makes us do anything. Whenever you move anything, whenever you speak, there's an act of will behind that. Sometimes the technical word volition is used, and that is just another way of saying the will, really. Or you can call it intention, if you like. Intention also includes the idea of willing. You intend something, and then you act it out. That is will. Also, choice is another way of translating this. I think that's quite a nice translation, actually, used by Bhante Sujato. Whenever you choose, you make a choice. That is an act of will, and then you pursue one thing rather than the other one. And this is a very important part of who we feel we are. Yeah, we are the doer in the world. We are the agent. We are creators. Yeah, we tend to often to put artists and musicians on a pedestal because they create beautiful things for all of us to enjoy. And if they create beautiful things for all of us to enjoy, then they deserve some kind of extra honor, yeah, or extra whatever. Yeah. So we often kind of feel creative people are very important in the world. And creative people are basically sankhara people. That's another word for creative person, sankhara person, because they kind of they do things, they will things, and they act things out in this way. And then the very last one is consciousness, and consciousness in Pali, vijnana, just means, it doesn't mean consciousness in a kind of developed way we talk about in English language. It just means the fact that you are aware. Yeah, the fact of awareness, the fact of being able to know anything. Yeah, seeing. Okay, I'm aware of seeing, aware of a sound or whatever it is. That is simply what consciousness is. Not a developed idea at all. It's a very simple act of awareness. But the thing that we're talking about now is sanya, perception. So what exactly is that? And perception is really our ability to understand the world, to make distinctions between things, yeah? Being able to know what is going on. Labeling, for example, yeah? And labeling can be, okay, person, floor, bricks, computer, alarm clock or whatever, gong, yeah? All of these things, our ability to make sense of these things comes from the idea of perception. In the suttas, perception is defined as you perceive red, yellow, white, yeah, red, yellow, white, blue, yeah, colors. That is kind of the basic idea of perception, the ability to distinguish between things in the world. And for any kind of experience that you have, perception has to be there. If there's no perception there, you can't make sense of what is going on. You can't understand what is happening. Yeah. So even in the very most refined states of consciousness, the most refined states of samadhi or meditation, there will always be perception there, because that is how you know what is going on. So you go to very profound states, for example, the jhana states, or you go beyond the jhana states. They're known as the immaterial realms. This perception is always present. You go to the state of nothingness, the akinchayatana. And the akinchayatana is the perception of the sphere of nothingness. Yeah. So what is your perception? Your perception is nothing. It's not that there isn't anything. Your perception literally is nothing. There's the awareness that nothing is going on. Yeah, there's nothing there, but that is also a perception, because that's the only way you can know that there is nothing. If you didn't know anything at all, then it wouldn't even be nothing. Yeah, nothing is something in this context. That's kind of very. Deep sleep? No, that's different. Yeah. So, not really. If you wish to come back to that, please, if you can write down a question, you're very welcome to do that, and we can kind of take it as a question later on. So please, that's okay. So there's always perception there, even in the most profound things. The most profound meditative state you can have, according to the Pali Suttas, is called the nevasanya nasanya ayatana, the sphere, or the sphere of neither perception and non-perception. That is also a perception. It is the perception of neither perception or non-perception. So the point here is that anything in the world, whenever we are in any kind of experience, it is always conjoined with some kind of perception. Otherwise, it would be impossible to make. Otherwise, you couldn't say anything about it. If there's no perception. And what that means is that whenever there is consciousness, there's also going to be perception. If there is no perception, the only possibility left is that there is also no consciousness. There is no awareness. There is no nothing. There's nothing at all. There is no nothing. Yeah, everything is completely gone. So this is how fundamental perception is. It takes you all the way to the end of absolutely everything here. So when these wanderers are asking about the cessation of perception, what they are really asking about from a Buddhist point of view is the ending of everything, absolutely everything here, including consciousness itself, including knowing itself, including all kinds of feelings, including absolutely everything here. And this is why it is so extraordinarily profound. And this is why the answer that the Buddha will give as we go through the sutta is also equally profound. Yeah? So, what do these wanderers think about this? Because this is what the Buddha says about this, but these wanderers probably have a slightly different idea about this. Yeah. We'll come back to the idea of cessation of perception later on. I'll just leave it there for now. And Potthapada then says to the Buddha, he says that some of these ascetics and Brahmins, they said this: a person's perceptions arise and cease without cause or reason. When they arise, you become percipient. When they cease, you become non-percipient. That is how some describe the cessation of perception. And so this is the fact that when they arise, you become percipient, and when they cease, you become non-percipient. Well, that kind of makes sense. But the problem here is this idea that they arise without cause or reason. That is a very non-Buddhist thing to say. Yeah. And of course, the Buddha is going to deny this. We'll see this in a second. Everything arises because causes and reasons. And I think even to me, this is a very strange way of thinking about the world, because it's very counterintuitive that things should arise and cease without cause and reason. But someone else says, that's not how it is, gentlemen. Perception is a person's self. When it enters, you become percipient. When it departs, you become non-percipient. That is how some describe the cessation of perception. So here we are coming closer to what is a very common way of thinking about the 5 khandhas and perception, perhaps specifically, that this is the person's self. This is your inherent essence. This is who you are. I am my perceptions. And this may relate to a general idea that you are kind of the sum total of your perceptions. All these perceptions is what I am, so in one way or another. But more likely, it would refer to you are a specific perception among these things, like a very refined perception, like a perception that you gain when you practice deep meditation, for example. These kind of things. This is what you are. This is a very common fallacy, and it even happens in Buddhist circles. You attain some very profound state of samadhi. This is me. I found the non-self-self. Non-self-self? What are you talking about, non-self-self? And this is the thing. It is a little bit like that, the non-self-self, because you know it's supposed to be non-self because the Buddha said so. And still, you cannot take it as a self, So you say, actually, this self is non-self, It's not actually a self. It's just permanent essence. It's exactly what the Buddha called the self, but it's not actually self after all. It gets very confusing. So again, these are very important areas because it is very easy to go wrong in these kind of areas and to take these profound states as a sense of self. So this is going to be an important part of the discussion when we talk about the 5 khandhas and looking at perception in particular. So this is a very standard view in ancient India, a very standard view in the present day. So for that reason, very interesting here. But someone else says, that is now not how it is, gentlemen. There are ascetics and Brahmins of great power and might. They insert and extract a person's perception. When they insert it, you become percipient. When they extract it, you become non-percipient. That is how some describe the cessation of perception. I hope you're not very mighty and powerful, are you, Venerable? You can oh, that's a scare. You can extract your perception and pull it out. That'd be very, very fascinating. I'm not really sure if I understand how that works, but what that means, I think this is the only place in the suttas this particular idea occurs. But I guess you can sort of have some idea, some powerful being is, maybe it's like God, God kind of molds you and kind of puts your soul into your body. Bang, oh, here I am, God created me, okay, this is it, I'm now existing because of that. Maybe something like that, The idea of being created by God might be what is kind of behind this. Except it's not God, it's a ascetic or Brahmin. Maybe there's someone who is just as powerful as God. But then comes the God idea. But someone else says, that is now not how it is, gentlemen. There are deities of great power and might. They insert and extract a person's perception. When they insert it, you become percipient. When they extract it, you become non-percipient. That is how some describe the cessation of perception. And then Potthapada says, that reminded me of the Buddha. Surely it must be the Blessed One, the Holy One, who is skilled in such matters. It's kind of amazing, these wonders are really open. The Buddha is skilled in, well-versed in the cessation of perception. How does the cessation of perception happen? So that kind of sets the scene, for the sutta. And from this basic idea, this basic question of how it happens, then the Buddha will then explain the rest of the sutta. Everything comes out of this. And a long sutta then talking about the development of perception and ultimately how the cessation of perception happens. So it's nice to end on a question mark, because it's like kind of leaving you on the kind of cliff's edge, and so that you are keen on coming back for the next session, So we know that's kind of this trick of the trade of being a teacher. You have to kind of leave people on the knife's edge like that. So we're going to come back. It's also a good time to come back because it's exactly 9 o'clock. So we will stop there, and then please, we'll see you back again. Have a nice lunch, and we'll see you back again at 3 o'clock this afternoon.